today on Ag News Daily.
If you look at flat price of soybeans versus all the major crops like corn, wheat, cotton, there is a clear advantage for soybeans over those other crops. And so we're probably going to see those other crops lose a few acres over to soybeans. The question is to what degree.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show.
You stole my line.
I know. I don't care. We're getting it done today.
It's because you made me run over here. Oh, the news
behind the scenes things folks don't see.
It's so hot. It's so fast paced, kind of like this Clipper-like weather pattern that we've been expecting. It was actually kind of the opposite. It dumped so much snow on us here. But in the Midwest, coming into next week, there's still chances for light snow, more gusty winds, and shots of really cold air. Although there might be a brief warm-up that's occurring between systems that will allow for some melting in the southern areas of the Midwest, overall precipitation amounts will likely remain too light to significantly impact drought conditions. Snowpack could increase, though, in parts of the northern regions. So more cold on our way, Delaney.
Well, I was listening to Sean Hackett yesterday at an event, and he's saying polar vortex, cold conditions through the end of December, at least into the new year, so not going away anytime soon. But another topic of discussion has been commodities looking at China specifically and whether or not they're going to follow through on their pledge to purchase 12 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans by the end of 2025. While some traders believe commercial and state-owned buyers, including COFCO, will set up purchases, a Farm Journal survey shows more than 75% of ag economists don't think China will reach that total. StoneX chief commodities economist Arlen Sederman says the market is already pricing in a smaller amount, around 8 to 10 million metric tons, spread through the current marketing year. Secretary Rollins also said she remains confident on the opposite side here that China will meet their commitment. She told CNBC earlier this week they've already purchased orders, and those are underway with nearly 1.5 million metric tons of soybeans moving to China so far. Secretary Rollins declared that meeting the 12 million ton commitment does not necessarily mean all soybeans will be shipped by year's end, but that the orders themselves are expected to be placed before the deadline. And I think we've seen 6 to 8 million tons of those soybeans committed so far.
Yeah, I was going to take a poll what the over-under should be on whether or not they will come through. We have seen the USDA trying to play catch-up after the government shutdown, and they newly released their export data, which shows a mixed picture in U.S. grains. According to the reports, the corn and wheat exports through mid-October are running well ahead of last year. Corn shipments since the start of the marketing year totaled over 10 million metric tons, up 58% year over year, while wheat sales from June 1 through October 16 reached over 11 million metric tons. That's a 23% increase for that category. Overseas commitments for both crops also remain strong, with corn bookings up 37% and wheat up 22% compared to that same time frame last year. Soybeans, however, are where we continue to feel the pressure from weaker demand. Sales from September 1 through mid-October only totaled 6 million metric tons. That's 32% below that same time period last year. Outstanding soybean commitments are also down sharply, 38% lower year over year, underscoring some of those ongoing challenges you just talked about in the export market, specifically with China. We'll be taking a look at more of this global picture in today's interview. Additionally, there was some positive news on crop quality, according to the U.S. Grains and Bioproducts Council. When they looked at the 2025-26 corn harvest, the quality report there, we saw the broken corn and foreign material levels at the lowest ever recorded level in the report's 15-year history. Nearly 88% of the grain samples met all of the U.S. number 1 grade requirements, and nearly 98% met U.S. number 2 standards, based upon more than 600 samples collected across the top corn-producing states. So I don't know what that says about our producers or our combines or just overall quality, but that certainly is a bright spot.
It is. I guess this might be a bright spot to some producers. I'm going to say that with a question mark at the end, but the Trump administration has said that they are preparing to announce a bridge aid package for American farmers within the next couple of weeks, some speculating as early as next week. The administration has previously said assistance is needed as farmers continue to struggle with low crop prices and lingering impacts from trade disputes. However, economists are split on whether additional trade aid is the right solution. Farm Journal's Ag Economists Monthly Monitor found half of respondents support more assistance, while the other half warn the industry has become too dependent on ad hoc payments. Many economists agree reported aid packages can distort land values, cash rent, and equipment purchasing decisions, and they also believe additional aid could further keep fertilizer and other input prices elevated. Farm groups are arguing support that is still urgently needed. American Farm Bureau President Zippy Duvall says farmers are facing, quote, a perfect storm of high costs and falling commodity prices, resulting in negative margins on many crops. He also says assistance isn't about making a profit, but about helping farmers survive the next growing season as trade negotiations and market conditions continue to evolve. So I'm guessing, Tanner, we're going to report on some sort of ad hoc payment next week. And this 2025 is teeing up to be the largest year of ad hoc and subsidy payments that we've seen in the history of the last at least few decades.
Well, that's probably directly tied into farmer sentiment, which improved in November due to some stronger crop prices and better export prospects. Purdue University and the CME Group put out their Ag Economy Barometer, which was up to 139, which is the highest since June. The jump was driven by a more optimistic outlook on the future, with future expectations index climbing 15 points to 144. Cash bids for fall delivery corn and beans rose 10 to 15% mid-fall, which lifted some of the confidence in the crop sector, and even weaker cattle prices weighed in on those that were livestock producers reporting. Despite improved sentiment, producers are still holding back on major investments. The Farm Capital Investment Index slipped again, with only 16% of respondents saying now would be a good time to expand. Long-term farmland value expectations reached a record high. The most corn producers expected cash rental rates to remain steady into 2026. They're still facing tighter margins. Many farmers say that they plan to cut costs by switching to lower-priced seed traits, reducing their phosphorus applications, and adjusting their seeding and nitrogen rates, though 40% said they won't change a single thing. According to this survey, though, many producers are counting on the USDA assistance package. If trade tensions continue to impact prices, more than half of those surveyed said that any ad hoc payments would go towards paying down their debt. While nearly 60% of farmers believe tariffs could strengthen agriculture in the long run, that number has slipped, though, since the spring reporting, and uncertainty about trade policy is continuing to rise. So I don't think there's any surprises in that report.
I think a lot of folks are paying attention, too, to see how the Supreme Court ruling on if tariffs are legal or not is going to shake out.
Yep.
But President Trump could decide next year to pull the U.S. out of the USMCA agreement. The comment from U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer was first reported by Politico earlier this week. Yet U.S. lawmakers are urging President Trump's administration to approach next year's USMCA agreement with clarity, as concerns grow over Canada and Mexico's ongoing tariffs. What was once expected to be a routine review in 26 is now shaping up to be a high-stakes negotiation. More than 100 members of Congress sent a letter to U.S. Trade Representative Greer, emphasizing respectful talks, noting the strong payoff for USMCA so far. Agricultural exports to Mexico have surged to nearly $30 billion in the past 5 years, compared to $20 billion over the entire previous decade, with similar gains seen in Canada as well. Over 120 farm groups and agribusiness groups are also calling for a full 16-year renewal of the agreement. Industry leaders say USMCA provides stability at a critical time as farmers face low commodity prices and rising input costs. The National Corn Growers Association also stressed that the agreement successfully resolved Mexico's biotech corn restrictions and improved regulatory efficiencies that save farmers money. Both groups want science-based standards strengthened and Mexico's ethanol rules addressed in the renegotiation, while pushing for a long-term extension to preserve reliable export markets for American agriculture. So one of many trade deals that we're going to touch on here in today's show, Tanner.
Yeah, I do think there's a pretty strong call for stability based upon a lot of these headlines. Same with this next one. Continuing discussions in the trade news are the 27 member states of the European Union that have approved a trade agreement negotiated by the European Commission with the United States. However, Mexico Business News reports that the European Parliament plans to challenge provisions it considers unfair after President Donald Trump tripled tariffs on certain EU products while Brussels agreed to eliminate duties on U.S. imports. In late November this year, the EU countries approved lower tariffs on U.S. goods under the deal that was reached last summer between the Commission and the White House. Though critics are urging the agreement places the EU exporters at a disadvantage, there is now a proposal to add a sunset clause, which would have ended the tariff cuts after 5 years if the deal was not renewed. That was debated, but ultimately has been rejected. The Commission called the agreement the best achievable, warning that failing to approve it would have been and placed the EU at an even greater disadvantage. Both now, the Council and the European Parliament must approve the final text by next spring. The EU Chamber of Commerce also released a recent survey that surveyed 131 of their member companies regarding its ongoing business with China. More than one-third said they were seeking to diversify their supply chains away from China. So a couple updates there coming out of the EU. We'll see if their parliament does make that vote happen.
Well, continuing on the trade front here, India expects to finalize a new trade deal with the United States before the end of 2025, with most issues between the two countries reportedly resolved, according to Reuters. The U.S. imposed a 50% import tariff back in late August, while negotiations were still ongoing. Then, earlier in November, President Trump said talks with India's prime minister were progressing quite well. The White House has pushed India to reduce oil purchases from Russia and lower tariffs across several sectors, including agriculture. India's trade secretary told industry leaders that a trade framework must come first, addressing reciprocal tariffs, while any remaining issues can be handled at the political level. Officials are optimistic a solution will be reached before the end of the year. India's trade deficit with the U.S. reached a record high back in October. And Tanner, I know India was also having some discussions this week with Russia as well, so they're certainly trying to have their cake and eat it too, so to speak. We'll talk more about some headlines in the trade coming up later on, but an update on New World screwworm, which has been detected about 120 miles from the U.S. border in Nuevo Leon, Mexico. This marks the third incident in the region since September. A USDA spokesperson says all three detections have been isolated and linked to the movement of animals from affected areas. The department continues to lead an aggressive, coordinated response and is working with Mexican authorities to prevent the pest from moving north. RCAF USA CEO Bill Bullard warns that the movement of cattle from southern Mexico, where screwworm remains active, to northern regions raises the risk of introducing the pest into the United States. USDA maintains a map of confirmed cases in Mexico at screwworm.gov.
Now we see ag leaders that are urging a science-based approach to the Make America Healthy Again movement. Speakers recently at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention shared their sentiment on how this influence and what it means to agriculture. On the fresh produce side, the question was asked, who is the winner? Molly Van Loo, the Vice President of Nutrition and Health of the International Fresh Produce Association, gives us an answer right here.
In terms of the winners, I think certainly it's hard to say because ultimately it's what the consumer decides to buy, right? And whether or not the policy or the conversation impacts those consumer choices, which has been a question even before MAHA came along. I thought it was interesting, though, last week, Secretary Kennedy did signal we expect the new dietary guidelines by the end of this year that, in his words, of ending the war on saturated fat. So on the surface, you would look at probably dairy products as being a winner in that, full-fat dairy products and beef. But then he also kind of alluded to production practices. So is that grass-fed? Is that crop protection tools? Is that size of the operation.
Now, while parts of the Make America Healthy Again messaging have improved since its first report, the work isn't finished, according to John Bodie, president and CEO of the Corn Refiners Association. He says more clarity and stronger science are still needed.
What is disconcerting is there's a misalignment between the messaging from MAHA and the consensus of what dietary changes need to occur. There is way too much stray messaging. Is there clarity and emphasis about eating more fruits and vegetables? I don't think it's there. Is there clarity about the importance of fiber in the diet? I'm not hearing it. So, the points of consensus are really not being emphasized. And instead, there's a lot of messaging that is simply inconsistent with where the science is. Lots of discussion about criticizing heart-healthy seed oils. What nonsense. Every authoritative scientific body is clear in support of the use of seed oils. That is not criticizing other fats or other oils, but to disparage those uniquely is simply a lost opportunity at best in consumer messaging.
The Corn Refiners Association CEO and president also addressed what it could mean for corn growers in the future.
My concern is, are we science and risk-based? Because if we're science and risk-based, that will be good for our food system and agriculture writ large. So the role of the corn refiners is we're making from corn products that are used throughout the food supply, animal feed, pharmaceuticals. The uses are extensive. And what we want, and I think is perfectly aligned with advancing public health, is science and risk-based policies. That will cause evolution in our food system. We will continue to advance sustainability in rational ways. And that agriculture can do very well. I think American agriculture can do it better than anybody in the world. And advance the goals of MAHA, but it probably means some of the objectives that they've already walked away from will need to be abandoned.
Well, switching tracks here, Tanner, farmers are caught in the middle of a political battle over extending the pandemic-era boost in Affordable Care Act subsidies as attention turns to next year's midterm elections. About 27% of farmers rely on these plans. Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar noted at town halls, highlighting the strain on rural households. Senate Republicans have resisted a straight extension, promising Democrats only a vote next week on alternative ACA proposals as insurers finalize their new premium rates. Senate Democrats remain divided on the approach. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer pushes for a direct extension, while retiring Senator Dick Durbin says lawmakers should address legitimate Republican concerns through negotiation. Senator Durbin also emphasized restoring tax credits for those who can't afford coverage, many of whom Klobuchar says are farmers struggling with tariffs and rising costs. With divisions in both parties and new premiums looming, reaching a deal before the rates take effect appears, unfortunately, highly unlikely. So I don't know exactly what that means for premium rates, Tanner.
It'll be interesting. You never see premiums shift once they start.
Or get less expensive, I would say, most of the time.
That's right. Well, at the end of 2025, as it approaches, many farmers have been looking for ways to reduce their tax bill. But a new tractor or piece of equipment purchase may not be the answer. Austin Pfeiffer, an associate attorney with the Ag and Business Legal Strategies, warns that buying expensive equipment solely for that tax purpose could be risky, stating a lot of farmers justify that by saying, I need to buy new equipment to save on my taxes, he said, and added, but it should be really a question of, is it still going to make me money? Pfeiffer advises farmers to focus on the business sense of the purchase, first asking if the purchase is going to improve operations, either save on labor or repair costs, or just give the farmer a new, fancier tractor. He adds that buying on credit for a tax deduction could leave a farmer with large payments for many years down the road for 1 year's worth of tax planning.
Appreciate that from him, but that's a hard mindset shift, I think, for a lot of farmers to have. Well, on a fun specialty news piece for you all just in time for the holiday seasons, U.S. cranberry production is forecast to hit their 5-year average. The 2025 crop is expected to be at 8.13 million barrels, down 9% from last year, but close to the average of nearly 8 million barrels. Cranberries are harvested from coast to coast ahead of the holiday season and are available fresh from October through December. With the remainder processed into products sold year-round, 1 barrel equals about 100 pounds of fruit. Do you think you could eat that in a year, Tanner?
No.
Wisconsin, the top cranberry producing state, is expected to harvest 5.3 million barrels alone, but that is down 3% from 2024, but 4% above the average past 3 years, helped out this year by dry growing conditions. Massachusetts, the second largest producer, saw production drop 22% this year, so certainly seeing some geographical shifts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Our interview for today. This week, we're digging into the fall grain harvest. What does a record corn, soybean, and grain sorghum crop look like, combined with ongoing trade uncertainty, mean now for storage and transportation logistics? We're going to get insights from today's conversation with Tanner Emke, the lead economist for grains and oilseeds at CoBank, the Knowledge Exchange.
Well, we're catching up with Tanner Emke, the grains and oilseed specialist for CoBank. Tanner, thanks for joining us today.
Delaney, great to be here with you.
Tanner, we have a lot of topics we could certainly talk about here heading into 2026 when it relates to grains and oilseed market outlook. What's the most important factor you're watching, though, as we head into the new year when it comes to what impacts prices?
The main thing, Delaney, is we got global oversupply. Okay, so that I don't think that's any news to anybody. We had a record fall crop here in this country. We have another record crop in South America coming as well. We had bigger wheat crops around the world also, and so this is just the market right now trying to work its way through higher supply through lower price. But of course, nobody wants to talk about those boring things like the weather. We got to get through the Brazilian crop first. Okay, so if we have another record Brazilian crop, it's going to be low prices for at least the first 6 months of 2026. They're going to low soybean prices are going to be dragging down on corn and wheat, and we still a lot of corn stocks in this country. We got to work through a pile of milo or grain sorghum on the plains that we're going to have to work through. Our wheat export program is very strong, but we got some competition coming through bigger exportable crops out of Argentina and Australia. So the main factor here is just simple oversupply. We haven't had a crop failure anywhere in the world to speak of, really. And so we got to work through this, and you can only do it through lower supply or through low prices over a prolonged period of time. So my bias here currently, Delaney, is that we're going to be in a period of low flat price for quite some time. Now, that being said, we got to find some opportunities here for prices to recover, either in the cash market or in the flat price. We do have some sort of trade truce with China. We'll take that as a win. At least they're back at the table buying from the United States. They're buying soybeans, at least. It'd be great to see them buy a little bit more grain sorghum. They're the number one market for grain sorghum as well. So the return of the Chinese coming back to the United States is a positive, but we're a little cautious on that because these are state-owned firms that are doing these purchases. They're politically motivated. We still have a 13% tariff on U.S. soybeans into China. And Brazil is still offering soybeans at a lower price than the U.S. So we're not going to see private firms in China, private crushers, buying from the U.S. when you have this disparity. Okay, and we need those private crushers coming back to the table to buy from the United States also, but we're not going to be seeing that, not at current prices. We need to see a weather issue develop in Brazil for us to see the United States finally have the advantage over Brazil on price. And then as it is with corn, we just got a lot of bushels, and it's still a phenomenal crop. Let's see what the United States or USDA rather does on the U.S. yield in January. This is going to be important. I know USDA was beat up a lot over their minor revision on the national corn yield here in the U.S. My bias is that we're going to have a little bit more of a revision coming, but I'm not bracing for anything major. USDA is already done. They're in this last report, they did an ear count. The issue is going to be with ear weights. How's the implied ear weight? How's that going to change? There was a lot of focus this past year on rust, southern rust with corn. We had some heat and drought issues further east in places like Ohio. So that's being factored in. But even if USDA were to drop their national yield down to, say, 184, okay, or 183 even, we're still around 2 billion bushel carryout on corn. We still have a lot of corn. Okay, there's no way around this. A lot of bushels are a lot of bushels. We still got to keep exporting. So that's the other side of corn. I think that in future reports, USDA is probably going to increase their export number on corn because we are exporting a phenomenal amount, this record amount of corn. So I think there's a positive here on usage. And then for wheat, same thing there. We've had a phenomenal export story for wheat. We've got some exporting competition coming online from Argentina and Australia. Both of those crops are much bigger. And then the Europeans had a bigger harvest. The Russians had a bigger harvest. And so there's some downside there, I think. So I think that perhaps that might be a headwind for us heading into 2026. So when we're talking about the price dynamic for next year, it's really all going to come back to Brazil in these next months. We got to get through December, see what kind of weather they have. And if they do indeed come out with a record soybean crop and a bigger corn crop, that means we're going to have depressed flat prices at least through the first half of 2026.
All right, there was a lot to unpack there. So I want to go back to China purchasing, coming to the table. You used the term, this is a political move, and you're not the first person that has kind of used that framework of it's a political move. Elaborate for us, though, what you mean by that.
Look at the people that are buying the soybeans. They are state-owned firms. COFCO is state-owned. Sinograin is state-owned. When you look at the cash market, U.S. prices are above Brazilian prices. So if you are a crusher anywhere in the world looking to buy soybeans, Brazilian soybeans are offered more competitively than U.S. Okay, so right there, that tells you that the purchases that China has made so far are politically motivated because on a flat price basis or an FOB price basis, Brazil is still more competitive. And so if you are buying simply on price alone, you would buy from Brazil.
But there is the argument some make that the protein of U.S. soybeans are higher than Brazil.
It's more consistent.
Yeah, consistent.
And there is an absolute argument to make on that. And we have seen increased exports into a number of other markets, like for instance, Mexico. Egypt, huge increases. Pakistan, big increases, although that was mostly because they had some weather issues over there. But a lot of other markets are taking U.S. soybeans and soybean meal, especially into Southeast Asia and some of those developing markets. One of the value propositions, if you will, of U.S. soy is of the consistency of the meal. And this is very important. And the digestibility of the meal, okay? You don't need to buy as much. Because the digestibility is better. And then on the consistency of the soybean meal protein concentration is that you can plan better for future feeding. So, for instance, if you know exactly what the meal content is going to be and what the digestibility is going to be, you can plan 3 months out, 6 months out a lot better than you can with other origins. This is hugely important. If, let's say, for instance, you're feeding poultry. and you know what the protein is for every load of soybeans or soybean meal that comes in, you can plan your barns accordingly, and you can maximize your real estate. And this is real money we're talking about. They can plan 6 to 8 months out, 10 months out on what their throughput is because you know what the content of the protein is.
Does that justify the higher price compared to the Brazilian soybean?
Some buyers will say yes, and we've seen that in places like Egypt. I talked with a soybean buyer in Egypt here recently in Geneva. It's at the Global Grains Conference, and the consistency is huge. That is their main thing that they offer as a supplier to their customers that are feeding poultry in that part of the world. They love the consistency, and so there is a value proposition here. Now, it's at the end of the day, if Brazilian soybeans are so competitive that they can afford to lose some efficiency, that might make a difference. But for a lot of these markets where they're growing their poultry numbers, they're growing their hog numbers in some areas, they need that consistency to maximize their efficiency.
I want to take it back here to domestic focused here for a while, because as you've mentioned, we had a record crop production this year across really all grains and oil seeds. With that hanging over the balance here, what does that mean as far as storage and transportation as we head into the winter months?
Yeah, that's been a problem in some local areas. A lot of grain dumped on the ground. You're not going to put soybeans on the ground. There was up in the Dakotas, a lot of wheat that ended up in silo bags or grain bags out in the field. A lot of milo in Kansas I've seen dumped on the ground, corn being piled and tarped. So we really had to come up with some innovative strategies this year on how to store grain for a couple of reasons. One, we did lose some exports, especially with soybeans. But number two, farmers aren't happy with price. And so if you're not going to sell today's price, that means you're going to have to store it. And so that created a storage challenge for a lot of farmers and their co-ops. And I know, especially in Kansas, where I'm from originally, huge milo piles everywhere. China's a market that has not shown up yet as a major buyer again. And we had a phenomenal harvest so far this year. And so what do? You got to pile it on the ground if you don't have upright storage capacity. So this has created some challenges. We're going to have higher shrink if those piles are not managed accordingly. If they're not managed properly, we'll say, if they're not tarped, if they're not in a bunker, if they're not on, let's say, a cement pad, if they're piled on dirt, you're going to have more loss, more shrink. If they're going to get rained on a lot, you're going to have more loss and shrink and spoilage there. So there's going to be a higher cost of carry. All of that factors into your total cost. Loss is one of those factors. And so if you're going to be delaying your purchases, delaying your grain sales, you have to factor in that higher cost of shrink. Okay. In addition to your higher borrowing costs, if your interest rates are higher, that's another cost. And then the cost of moving a pile. It's not cheap. It's not as cheap as putting it in upright storage where gravity is free. You don't pay for gravity. But if you're going to move a pile, let's say you got 1 million bushels piled on the ground, it takes a lot of front end loaders, a lot of wheel loaders, scooping that grain up, dumping it in a truck, doing that over and over again. A lot of labor, a lot of machinery, a lot of time. Okay, that's another cost. So these piles on the ground are not cheap. You have to factor in those higher costs.
Yeah, that's a great way to break that down. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I want to go back to China for a second. I know we were kind of on a tangent there for a bit, but I love this conundrum, as you call it. And maybe it applies to milo, too, based on what you're sharing. But can other countries fill the void left by China when it comes to some of those export demand opportunities? So,
boring statistic. As an economist, I got to throw those numbers out. China's 60% of the market. You don't get away from China. Okay? There's over half. For all soybean imports. Okay? It's 60% of the market. There is no getting away from China. We need China. Okay? Yes, we have increased exports into other markets. That is a huge win. At the same time, we have increased domestic usage here in the U.S. That is a huge win as well. But there's no avoiding it. We still have to play with China. And we need to have stable markets. We need to have trade certainty. We need trade deals that are inked and everybody understands what they are. We're not quite there yet. We have a trade truce, and it's kind of ambiguous about what's in that. We're still waiting details on that. But there's just no escaping it. We got to trade with China because we produce more soybeans and soybean meal than we can use in this country. We got to send it someplace, and China's going to be there always as a destination, and we want that to be a good destination.
So with 60% being that market share for China, that's a big number. I understand that. What would it take? Because we do see crush and processing facilities coming online at maybe accelerated paces here in the United States. What would it take for us to theoretically replace that Chinese demand, even maybe just a portion of it?
We would need to add probably another 3 or 4 crush plants to the U.S. We don't see that coming right now. Right now, there's one expansion for 2026 and another new greenfield plant in Ohio that's coming online, and that's all positive for sure. That's going to be supporting cash basis in those local markets, but it's not going to replace China. We still have to. We're always going to have more than we can consume, and so having good trade relations with China is usually a good thing.
Do you see any other markets, maybe aren't going to be that large for trading partners, but any up and coming markets of developing countries that could present opportunity to fill in some of that void?
Well, now we're talking like a longer term story.
Yes.
The growth markets take time to build. Because you're talking about demographical changes, like in Southeast Asia, for instance, that's a huge growth market. A lot of people entering the middle class, they're improving their diets, more protein, more dairy, and so that's a growth market for our soybean meal exports. We have growth markets in the Middle East, same thing there, rising middle income or middle class incomes, more people eating animal protein, specifically chicken. That's their main protein source now. Chickens eat soybean meal, and so growth market there. Maybe some opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa. That's a little bit of a hard market to get into just because of infrastructure, and it's hard to export into that market. But we're seeing more wheat exports, not so much soybeans. Egypt is really the growth market in Africa or Middle East, and then India. Everyone's always asking about India, and that again another growth market there. 1.4 billion people. They are the biggest country now globally. They're bigger than China. Their population is growing. China's population is shrinking. They're the fastest growing economy in the world, and fastest growing major economy in the world, about 6%, 7% growth. China's less than that, 4%, maybe even less than, or perhaps they're even shrinking. But a lot of opportunity there in India. But again, India's not China. Their laws are different. Their infrastructure is different.
Mm-hmm. Culture is different.
Their culture is different. Their culinary choices or their cultural dietary restrictions are different because a lot of people don't eat protein over there. Hindus, they don't eat, animal protein. Mm-hmm. But you have a large Muslim population, and they do. They eat a lot of poultry over there. And that, again, is the growth market. So some opportunity to send more soybeans and soybean meal into India. But again, this is more of a long-term view. We just can't turn on a dime and replace China because, like I said, 60%, that's not replaceable today or tomorrow. That's a long-term story.
Absolutely. Let's take it into a little bit of a more short-term view as we think about heading into 2026. Thinking about planting decisions, acreage mix, all of those good things. What are the signals we should be paying attention to if we do have the ability to shift some acres around in 2026?
If you look at the price ratios right now, at this present moment, it would indicate we're going to see a shift over to soybeans. Because if you look at flat price of soybeans versus all the major crops like corn, wheat, cotton, there is a clear advantage for soybeans over those other crops. And so we're probably going to see those other crops lose a few acres over to soybeans. The question is to what degree. We have a cost of production issue. Cost of production is rising for farmers. Corn is a very heavy capital-intensive crop, and so that may push a few acres out of corn over to soybeans. There may be an opportunity for wheat, where I know on the plains we've had a lot more moisture, and I've heard anecdotally farmers are foregoing fallow and they're double cropping. As soon as that corn, soybean, or grain sorghum crop comes out of the field, they're going right back in with a planter or a drill and they're planting wheat. And so if they're planting winter wheat, what that then implies then is might be more opportunity for double cropping into wheat stubble next summer with soybeans. There you go. Yeah. Okay, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, but there's currently a clear advantage for soybeans over the other crops. We're going to have to get through the Brazilian harvest to find out if that advantage even holds. Brazil is on pace to grow another record soybean crop. And if it's as big as people think it is, that could really impact soybean prices in this country and dissuade farmers from wanting to plant more soybeans. So we got to get through December 1st before we start really making any calls on where we go on acreage.
Great. A lot of things to consider. Tanner, thanks for your time.
Of course, anytime, Delaney. Thanks.
Well, as always, we appreciate all insight from Tanner's. So now, Delaney, what's happening in the markets this week?
I was waiting for some sort of Tanner and Tanner joke, but one other trade headline we didn't mention earlier, but I do want to make sure we touch on is President Trump and President Putin met this week to discuss a potential trade deal between Ukraine and Russia, a 28-point deal to be more specific. So certainly going to see how that plays out in the markets. Definitely range bound here for the next few weeks is what a lot of folks are thinking. Not a lot of great things to spark life into the markets, but we're definitely watching the U.S. dollar, interest rates as Jerome Powell steps out of office, consumer reports, job reports, etc. But the Fed will meet next Tuesday and Wednesday with the odds of a rate cut at now 90%. The CME Fed Watch tool is indicating 89% chance of another quarter percent interest rate cut from the Fed next week. So we'll see how that comes to fruition, Tanner. But we were just talking about interest rates yesterday at an event that I was speaking at, and a lot of folks think that is probably the biggest outlier for next year.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see all the economic drivers, of course, where we get updates coming as far as these incentive packages, these aid packages, trade agreements. Certainly a reason to continue to tune into Ag News Daily every single week. Check out our clips on all of our social media channels, but we will try to keep up with the latest headlines for you. And if you're an Iowa State football fan, hopefully we have no news for you next Friday, and we get to keep our beloved program together. So looking forward to enjoying a happy weekend ourselves. We wish you guys a very happy weekend. Stay warm. And tune in next week. But for today, what do you say, Delaney? Should we let him go?
Let's let him go.